Howard Shimmel, currently forming a consultancy. Can you tell us a little bit about your transition and your consultancy?
Yeah, so I left Turner at the end of May. After a great 6-year run there, I look back on those days very, very fondly. Got to do a lot of really cool things. Got to do a lot of really interesting research. So I formed a company called Janus Strategy and Insights. Janus is a Roman god who looks to the future, but he does that in a way where he keeps a very close eye on the past. Actually, if you see him depicted, you'll actually see he is two-faced. He's got one face looking one way and the other looking the other way. I thought that was my feeble attempt to be strategic and a little bit interesting. And you know, the thing I hope is that I could leverage my expertise, leverage my experience to help the market move in a better direction, and potentially help maybe emerging research data companies figure out a way that they could become bigger and more scalable.
What would you say are the biggest challenges that companies face today?
Well, we'll sort of separate that into two questions, Charlene. So obviously media companies are challenged with growing ratings, the challenges with subscribers, the challenges with new competition from Netflix and Amazon and Apple, and the challenge of moving from a world where 15 years ago we had the benefit of a walled garden. Most of the time people wanted to watch TV, the first thing they did is turned on their cable box, to moving to a world where they could turn on their cable box, they could turn on their Roku device, they could go to the smart TV app menu on their TV. And so, the first challenge is just how do media companies migrate to a new reality, which could not be more different than I think the reality we spend most of our careers living in. On the emerging research company data side, I think it's figuring a way that they could come to market and position their product in a way that fits within the existing work streams of a media company. So let's use, my experience at Turner. We need companies to come with solutions where they clearly see how they're additive to what we're doing day to day right now. There's a lot of great data out there. There are a lot of new, really interesting companies, but they need to refine themselves and be more clear about the net benefit they provide to us.
So in the world of actually data management, there's a lot going on. What have you learned from your time at Turner to best use the data to help forward your business?
Yeah, so the first mistake I think we make in the industry is, we tend to put what the tools that had been in our arsenal for a bunch of years, Nielsen, MRI, Scarborough, Simmons, ComScore, we tend to put those in a very different bucket than we think about all of the first and second and third party data that digital and now over the top and virtual MVPDs are enabling. And I think the first thing that companies need to do is they need to really think about a holistic data strategy where they're using each of those assets for its right use case, and they're also finding ways to leverage across those assets. If you think about it, a network has great first-party consumption data from their network apps. But all they're seeing is a very limited view of consumption. What they need the ability to do is find a way through data modeling or data appends to model linear consumption on top of that, which potentially then makes all of the applications they're looking to do with their over-the-top apps more powerful than if they were just using the information that they could see. So I think there's sort of a definition and scope issue of not putting these in very separate departments and making sure companies are integrating them right. And then there is the real day-to-day, how do you leverage them together to be able to execute better strategies?
Well, it's sort of easier to explain than to actually do. Did you find that you were able to find solutions to do that?
You're right that it's easier to describe than to execute. I think at Turner we were probably, half of the way to get there when I left at the end of May. I think across the industry, it's a vision that we all need to be sort of, striving towards.
We have a lot of issues going on that have global implications. Let's start with privacy, GDPR. What do you think the implications are for the United States?
I think they're huge. My view is that eventually the U.S. will move to more of a permission-based, transparent data relationships that consumers have with platforms. I don't see how something GDPR-like doesn't come to the U.S. My view is that consumers are willing to give up their information, trade their information. They just need transparency in terms of how it's being used, and they need to be rewarded for giving it up. I think the world where where you have terms of use agreements that are 20 pages long, no consumer ever reads through them. I think eventually that world is gonna get smaller, and I think a world where people have more control of their data, are able to look. I'd be willing in a year. I'm going to be looking for a new car. I'd be willing to tell the marketing world, turn on car ads, find a way to surface to me relevant car information so I can make that process easier. And then when I've bought the car, stop, because I'm going to be out of the market for a couple of years. I think eventually we're going to migrate to more of that world. I think whether it is companies like Axiom or Experian or Epsilon, I think there's a world for them providing more of the trusted place where you go to control your data, and then they're used to fuel the rest of the market. But yeah, I'm not a privacy expert, but I don't see how something GDPR doesn't affect our market at some point.
So in addition to the privacy issue on a global basis, where do you see the media business on a global basis in general?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two questions there, or two ways to think about it. One is, I think there are a lot of countries that are trying to think about how, from a content consumption perspective, do they avoid having Netflix have the same impact in their countries that Netflix has had in the United States. Obviously, what Netflix has done from an overall consumption and changing the way people watch TV perspective is massive. And countries are thinking about, as if Netflix is only 15-20% of penetrated in their country versus 60 in the U.S., what are the decisions they make that potentially either slow down Netflix's growth or slow down Netflix's impact? So that's, one thing I think most countries and broadcasters within countries are struggling. The other is there is a huge appetite to try to learn from the United States in terms of dealing with the measurement challenges that we've had. Are there ways that true cross-platform measurement could come to pass in the market more easily, and then also learn from what we've done from the standpoint of moving away from age, sex demographics to moving towards audiences. I actually had the privilege to present. There's a major French broadcaster, TF1, and they've done some early stuff in the French market. They actually have a database where they fused Médiamétrie, which is the Nielsen of their market, with the Kantar Global Study, which is the MRI of their market, So they basically have started to create the data sets. They're right now thinking about how they actually bring those to market, and they were very interested in my experience from the US to help guide what their strategy is. And I think there's a lot of interest outside the US in trying to make audience buying something that happens more quickly and at bigger scale.
How far away do you think we are in the United States from a cross-platform solution in measurement?
Yeah, so the you know, I mean, if we think about our career arcs, we've been friends with media companies like Nielsen and Comscore. We've challenged them when they've needed to be challenged. One thing I think the industry hasn't really done is really defined what does it mean to have a cross-platform solution. You know, if you think about really the heart of Nielsen Total Audience, it really is to measure a program and get a complete view of a program across all of the platforms that the program is available to consumers on. Linear TV, video on demand, digital, digital if it's through a provider like Hulu, digital on a network app. And the product scope is right to do that. I think where Total Audience falls a little short, and again, I think it gets to where I think we haven't done a good job of explaining what we need to the research suppliers like Nielsen and Comscore, is we need a tool that allows us to see traditional linear spots together with digital addressable spots, to be able to plan those together, to be able to optimize those together, to be able to steward them together, and then on the back end to be able to measure impact, right? And I think because, so even yesterday's announcement with Comscore, which is great that they can provide reach and frequency post-campaign for all things linear and digital, including over the top, it's a great step. But if they haven't filled in those other stages, planning, optimization, allocation, stewardship, I still think we're going to be missing. So, you know, I worry that we're not moving fast enough, that we're still 5 years out, and that, that we're potentially building for a solution where we don't know what other technological changes are going to happen to the consumers that maybe will change the way advertising is executed. So, you know, it's sort of where the hamster's on the wheel chasing a solution that keeps changing the faster we run. So, you know, one of the things I've been thinking about is there needs to be a forcing mechanism to get the industry to once and for all, based on at least whatever perspective we have on the future, tell Nielsen and Comscore and anybody else who wants to play in the space, here's what the solution needs to do, and then see how they react.
What would be the force behind that?
I actually think one of the major forces should be the advertisers. You know, I was on a panel at some event a couple of months ago, and I just had this epiphany that when you go back to Art Nielsen in the 40s, whenever he dreamed up this idea of radio ratings, which then became TV ratings, what he was thinking about was not creating a marketing effectiveness measurement. He was thinking about creating a way for buyers and sellers to trade and transact. And you know, and look, Nielsen linear ratings today do a great job of enabling the, you know, $50 billion national TV market. The thing, though, that we understand is that market is getting smaller, and that audiences are quickly moving to digital, even if it is someone watching ESPN on an ESPN over-the-top app on a big screen TV. So I think the big voice has to be the advertiser. they're the ones who are leaving ROI untapped because of the measurement challenges. And I think they need to sort of take the mantra and lead, and then media companies have to fall in step, research companies have to fall in step. I just believe the advertiser voice hasn't been loud enough as we think about some of the challenges we faced over the last bunch of years.
So I think there's a lot of pressure being put on the agency business right now to get new business, to hold on to old business. So maybe there's a little bit of hesitancy on the agencies because of the fear of losing business and the stresses that they're under.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we're in this world. We've had the benefit for most of our careers of living in a world where syndicated research was the thing that drove most of the planning and transacting, that went on, especially with TV. We're now in a world where every agency is creating their own customized data stack. You have instances like the purchase of Axiom a couple of weeks ago by OMD, where now an agency wants to have great first-party data to fuel planning, activation, measurement. I think one of the things we're going to struggle with in the next bunch of years is homegrown solutions with custom data versus the need for us to have syndicated data that guides the way we do things. I think it's going to be, I understand why agencies are doing what they're doing with building data stacks and having unique things that they're selling when they're trying to pitch a new client. But on the other hand, I think that's going to make it harder for media companies to execute against that data. And I think eventually maybe things will get back, we'll still have syndicated with custom attributes or custom applications off of that. But I think that's something that still has a little bit, it's going to take it some time to work itself out.
So in the realm of AI and machine learning, how do you see that playing out in media?
Look, I think if you think about what we've benefited from in the last couple of years, bringing brilliant data scientists into media companies, and those guys becoming an additional asset for research companies. I believe AI and machine learning just have the ability to escalate researchers' ability to really better understand at a sort of an atomic level what's going on. Look, we've been trained in a world where NPower was our analytics engine. Now, NPower does a great job of looking from the 40,000 foot level down, but we lose sight of the fact that there are actual Nielsen people, panelists, and they are representing what's going on in the population. And I think we haven't done a good enough job of studying individual panelists and how their behavior has changed over time, and understanding really what impacts how they watch. Is it competition? Is it the weather? Is it bad traffic in the market on a day that drove putts down? And I'm actually a really, really big proponent that I think AI and machine learning could take researchers and make us a lot smarter than we've had the capability of being in the past.
So Howard, looking forward the next 3 to 5 years, give me some predictions for the media industry.
So first, I think we will get our measurement act together. I think, 5 years out, I think we will be able to do a much better job of stitching together linear and digital and over the top and virtual MVPD together in a way where we can take an advertiser, where a media company has the ability to take an advertiser, understand what their desired outcomes are, and develop a plan that is not only geared at reach and frequency, but is geared at impact, some sort of sales impact. I think, so I feel really good that we will be able to get our measurement act together. I think the second thing is that, I think you'll see a lot more success among major companies like Warner Media or NBC, Universal, or Disney, ABC, in terms of finding material direct-to-consumer businesses and ways to complement the linear ad model, a business that was driven by linear television in a really big way. And then the third is, I think you'll start to see, at the end of the day, the question isn't television versus Netflix or television versus Facebook or television versus Google. It is how those work together. And, at the end of the day, and this is something that Jack Myers has been very, very smart to talk about. Our challenge is the media business still has a challenge, and whether it's a publisher or an agency, that there's still a lot of money spent in below-the-line marketing. And those dollars sometimes aren't necessarily, they may drive some short-term ROI for the advertiser, but they definitely don't build brand. And I think what you'll see is the media industry, linear and digital, coming together in a way where it's clear that media is a way to spend those dollars, new media forms that are more sales dependent than dropping a coupon in a circular. So I think you'll start to see a little bit more collaboration, because we need to collaborate. For some companies, packaged good companies, they spend $2 in below-the-line marketing for every dollar they spend in above-the-line. So I think you'll start to see more collaboration and less, confrontation between us.